Admiral Jake Morrison sat in the grand chamber of the Galactic Council Station. The massive room sparkled with lights from 47 different species. Each alien delegate had their own special chair designed for their unique body shape. Jake looked around at his fellow representatives and felt proud of what humanity had accomplished over the past 200 years. The humans were known across the galaxy as the Peaceful Giants. They built hospitals on war-torn worlds. They designed clean energy systems for struggling colonies. They mediated disputes between hostile species. Captain Lisa Chen commanded the medical ship UES Mercy, which had saved millions of alien lives. Engineer Ben Carter created the solar power systems that kept the Outer Rim colonies running. Dr. Amy Foster managed refugee camps that housed displaced beings from dozens of different worlds. Jake remembered his history lessons about Earth before. The Compact. The Third World War had nearly destroyed humanity in 2156. After that terrible conflict, human leaders created the Terran Behavioral Compact. Every human child born since then received a small device implanted in their brain at birth. These neural dampeners removed aggressive thoughts and violent impulses. The galaxy saw humanity's peaceful nature as wisdom and evolution. They had no idea it was completely artificial. The other species respected humans but also looked down on them. The insect-like Vex considered humans useful workers but physically weak. The crystal beings called Zephyrians saw humans as primitive creatures who needed guidance. The reptilian Drakmor Empire tolerated humans as valuable servants and builders. None of these species knew that every human carried the genetic memory of a species that had fought its way to the top of Earth's food chain. Jake studied the daily reports flowing across his tablet. Strange incidents were happening in the outer colonies. Ships disappeared without sending distress signals. Entire mining settlements went dark overnight. Supply convoys vanished between star systems. The Council dismissed these events as pirate attacks or equipment failures. But Jake saw a pattern that worried him deeply. The missing ships followed specific routes. The attacked settlements all produced rare metals needed for advanced technology. The timing suggested careful planning rather than random violence. Someone was testing the galaxy's defenses and mapping its resources. Jake had spent years mediating conflicts, and he recognized the signs of a predator stalking its prey. Dr. Amy Foster sent him a private message from her refugee camp on Kepler 7. 3 transport ships carrying medical supplies had vanished in the past month. The ships carried neural dampener components needed for human children in the outer colonies. Amy worried that someone was specifically targeting human infrastructure. Ben Carter reported similar problems from the industrial worlds. Automated. Factories producing human technology kept suffering mysterious accidents. Power grids failed at crucial moments. Communication arrays went offline during important transmissions. The pattern suggested sabotage, but no evidence remained at any of the sites. Jake requested a meeting with the Council's military committee. The chamber filled with representatives from the major military powers. General Crix of the Vex spoke first in his buzzing voice. His species had fought countless wars using swarm tactics and overwhelming numbers. Admiral Veltar of the Drakmor Empire described recent skirmishes with unknown attackers near the Galactic Rim. The crystalline delegate from the Zephyrian Collective shared sensor data showing massive energy signatures moving through empty space. The evidence pointed to something big approaching from outside the galaxy. The energy readings matched no known technology. The attack pattern suggested intelligence and planning far beyond typical pirate activities. Most disturbing was the systematic nature of the incidents. Someone was mapping the galaxy's defenses and identifying its weaknesses. Jake accessed the classified human archives during a break in the meeting. The neural dampeners allowed him to read about humanity's violent past without feeling the emotional impact. He learned about ancient wars and the development of human tactical thinking. The files contained references to something called the Devourer Wars from 50,000 years ago. The records were incomplete, but mentioned an extragalactic threat that consumed entire civilizations. The ancient alliance of species had apparently driven off this threat through great sacrifice. But as Jake read deeper into the files, he found disturbing inconsistencies. The timeline didn't match the victory claims. The casualty report suggested complete military collapse rather than successful defense. The enemy had simply vanished, rather than being defeated. Captain Lisa Chen contacted Jake from the Mercy near the Outer Rim. Her medical sensors had detected strange energy patterns in space where ships had disappeared. The readings suggested technology that could disassemble matter at the molecular level. Lisa's training focused on preserving life, but even her dampened instincts recognized these signs as extremely dangerous. Jake realized the galaxy faced a threat unlike anything in recorded history. The peaceful species of the Council had grown, comfortable with diplomatic solutions and defensive strategies. They had forgotten how to fight a war for survival. Even the warrior cultures like the Drakmor relied on honor codes and traditional tactics that might prove useless against an advanced enemy. That night, Jake stood in his quarters looking out at the stars. The neural dampener in his brain kept him calm despite the growing evidence of approaching disaster. He thought about humanity's role as mediators and builders. But somewhere deep in his genetic memory, older instincts stirred. His ancestors had survived ice ages and predators by adapting and fighting back. Those same survival instincts lived in every human, waiting behind artificial barriers of forced peace. The emergency alarm echoed through the Council station for the first time in over a century. Jake Morrison rushed to the main assembly hall where delegates from all 47 species gathered in obvious panic. The giant viewing screen showed long-range sensor data that made Jake's blood run cold despite his neural dampeners. Massive objects moved through space beyond the galactic rim. The energy signatures were unlike anything in the Council's databases. Ships the size of small moons traveled in perfect formation toward inhabited star systems. Behind them came something even larger that blocked out entire star fields as it passed. Admiral Veltar of the Drakmor Empire stood at the central podium. His scaled face showed the first signs of fear Jake had ever seen from the proud warrior. Species. The Admiral's report painted a grim picture of the Outer Rim defenses. 3 full battle groups had engaged the approaching fleet and been completely destroyed. The enemy weapons absorbed energy blasts and converted kinetic impacts into fuel for their advance. The Vex Queen buzzed her mandibles in distress as she described evacuation plans for the outer colonies. Her species excelled at rapid reproduction and mass coordination, but even they could not move billions of beings fast enough to escape the approaching threat. The crystalline Zephyrian delegate calculated probability matrices that showed less than 3% chance of successful resistance using conventional tactics. Jake accessed the human archives again during the emergency session. Dr. Peter Hayes had transmitted new files from Earth containing information that shocked him. The Devourer Wars from 50,000 years ago were not ancient history. They were a cyclical event that repeated every few millennia. The extragalactic machines consumed everything in their path, then moved on to new hunting grounds when resources became scarce. The ancient alliance had not driven off the Devourers through military victory. They had simply waited until the machines grew bored and left for easier prey. The surviving records described desperate retreats to the galactic core while entire sectors were consumed. Billions of beings died not in glorious battle, but in systematic, harvesting operations. Jake studied the enemy tactics with growing understanding. The Devourers tested defenses by attacking isolated targets first. They mapped resource locations and strategic choke points. They eliminated military assets before targeting civilian populations. The pattern was identical to what had been happening in the outer colonies for months. Dr. Hayes sent an encrypted message directly to Jake's personal communicator. The transmission contained information so classified that even Jake's security clearance barely granted access. Hayes had been studying the neural dampener technology in secret for decades. His research revealed something that terrified him about human nature. The dampeners did not just suppress aggressive behavior, they limited pattern recognition, tactical thinking, survival instincts, and adaptive reasoning. Human brains operated at less than 60% capacity while the devices remained active. The peaceful nature that made humans valued mediators also made them unable to comprehend the true scope of military threats. Jake felt a chill as he realized the implications. Humanity had been lobotomized for over 2 centuries in the name of peace. Their role as galactic diplomats depended on their inability to think like warriors. But the approaching enemy required exactly the kind of strategic thinking that humans had been denied. The council session continued for 18 hours as representatives debated impossible choices. Some species planned to evacuate to distant galaxies. Others discussed surrender terms that might preserve some population. The warrior cultures spoke of honorable last stands that would accomplish nothing except satisfying pride. Jake listened to the debates with growing frustration. The neural dampeners kept him calm, but could not completely suppress his recognition of tactical incompetence. The council was planning to fight a war using the same failed strategies that had led to defeat 50,000 years ago. They would retreat to the galactic core and hope the enemy would eventually leave. Captain Lisa Chen reported from the front lines where her medical ship treated survivors from the destroyed battle groups. The few beings who escaped described weapons that violated known physics. Devourer ships absorbed incoming fire and used the energy to power even more devastating attacks. Conventional shields provided no protection against beam weapons that disassembled matter at the quantum level. Ben Carter transmitted technical analyses from the industrial worlds showing how quickly the enemy advanced. They consumed entire asteroid belts in hours and converted the raw materials into new ships. Every destroyed colony became resources for expanding their fleet. Traditional defensive strategies would only provide them with more raw materials for conquest. The debate ended when long-range sensors detected the enemy main fleet entering the galaxy proper. The energy readings suggested thousands of ships, surrounding a central construct larger than most inhabited worlds. The Devourer command vessel had begun transmitting signals in hundreds of languages, demanding immediate surrender from all sentient species. Jake stood before the assembled council and made a decision that would change everything. He requested emergency authorization to contact Earth directly through classified channels. The other delegates looked confused, since humans were already represented through the normal diplomatic networks. Jake did not explain that he intended to reach beyond the official government to the deepest levels of human military command. The transmission to Earth carried a simple message that had not been sent in over 200 years. Jake spoke directly to the Terran High Command bunkers buried beneath the planet's surface. His words were calm, but carried implications that made his hands shake despite the neural dampeners. The galaxy faced extinction from an enemy that had defeated every known military force. Conventional weapons were useless. Traditional tactics had already failed. The only hope for survival required humanity to remember what they had been before the compact forced them to become peaceful. Jake's final words to Earth were both a request and a warning: remove the restraints. President Kate Sullivan stood in the deep bunkers beneath Geneva, where humanity's true government had waited for over 2 centuries. The emergency session included officials who had never seen daylight and commanded weapon systems that officially did not exist. Defense Secretary Ryan O'Brien displayed tactical analyses that painted a clear picture of galactic extinction within months. Dr. Peter Hayes transmitted the neural dampener shutdown codes from the council station. The decision required unanimous approval from the 7 members of the Shadow Cabinet. Each person understood that removing the restraints would fundamentally change human nature forever. The peaceful species that had mediated conflicts for 200 years would cease to exist. Kate looked at the faces around the table. These people remembered what humanity had been before the compact. Their families had maintained the hidden, military infrastructure that could transform the galaxy's perception of human capabilities. The choice was simple, but terrible. Keep the dampeners active and watch the galaxy die, or release humanity's true nature and risk becoming something the galaxy would fear. The shutdown began simultaneously across every human world and ship. 7 billion people experienced the removal of mental barriers that had defined their species for generations. The process was not painful, but it was immediate and total. Captain Lisa Chen felt it first aboard the UES Mercy near the battle lines. Her mind suddenly processed tactical information with crystal clarity. The medical frigate she commanded had always seemed perfectly designed for its humanitarian mission. Now she saw it as woefully inadequate for survival in a hostile galaxy. The cargo bays could house manufacturing equipment. The medical scanners could track enemy movements. The rescue shuttles could carry weapons that violated several treaties humanity had signed in good faith. On the mining colony of New Denver, Foreman Carl Martinez noticed his workers moving differently within hours of the shutdown. Conversations became shorter and more efficient. Safety protocols that seemed reasonable yesterday now appeared dangerously optimistic. Security Chief Rachel Murphy found herself analyzing defensive positions in corridors she had walked safely for years. The changes were most dramatic among military personnel. Admiral Morrison experienced tactical awareness that made previous strategic thinking seem like children playing with toys. Battle plans that required weeks of analysis now became obvious within minutes. The enemy movement patterns revealed clear intentions that the Council's experts had completely missed. Dr. Susan Blake led teams of newly unrestrained scientists on Earth in analyzing Devourer technology from sensor data. Without the dampeners limiting their cognitive abilities, they made connections that should have taken months of research. The enemy ships used principles that human minds could now understand despite having no previous exposure to the technology. Military. Engineer Tony Rodriguez redesigned weapon systems in his head faster than computers could process the calculations. The theoretical physics that had been beyond human comprehension suddenly made perfect sense. He saw ways to turn the Devourer's own technology against them using principles that peaceful humans could never have conceived. Jake Morrison felt the change most profoundly during his final address to the Galactic Council. The diplomatic language that had come naturally for decades now seemed clumsy and inefficient. He spoke with precision that made several alien delegates step backward instinctively. The peaceful mediator they had known was gone, replaced by something that analyzed their body language for signs of weakness. The galaxy noticed the transformation immediately. Human communications became military in tone and content. Diplomatic. Requests changed to intelligence requirements. Humanitarian missions altered course toward strategic positions. The species that had spent 2 centuries building trust with aliens suddenly began acting like an entirely different civilization. Captain Chen's medical frigate received new orders that would have been unthinkable under the old system. Instead of continuing refugee operations, she was directed to the nearest military depot for immediate retrofitting. Her protests about abandoning medical duties were met with cold logic about survival priorities that her unrestrained mind found completely reasonable. Ben Carter's engineering teams began producing weapons that technically violated the peaceful treaties humanity had signed. The legal implications were irrelevant when facing extinction. His designs used principles that peaceful human minds could never have developed. The manufacturing facilities that had produced humanitarian supplies quickly converted to military production. Admiral Morrison's transformation was the most visible to the alien delegates. His final diplomatic address contained language that sounded reasonable but carried implications that made experienced negotiators nervous. He thanked the Council for their trust over the past 2 centuries, then politely informed them that humanity would no longer be requesting permission for their actions. The alien species began comparing notes about human behavior changes. The Vex observed that human movement patterns had become more efficient and predatory. The Zephyrians calculated personality shifts that suggested complete cognitive restructuring. The Drakmor recognized the signs of a warrior species awakening. From artificial dormancy, Dr. Hayes transmitted regular updates to the Shadow Cabinet about the unrestrained human population. Psychological profiles showed increased aggression, improved tactical thinking, enhanced pattern recognition, and most significantly, reduced emotional attachment to previous moral constraints. The peaceful giants were becoming something the galaxy had never seen. President Sullivan received reports from human colonies across the galaxy about spontaneous military organization. Civilian administrators were implementing defensive measures without official orders. Trade networks were becoming supply lines. Diplomatic missions were gathering intelligence about alien military capabilities. The transformation was happening, faster than anyone had predicted. The most disturbing change was in human emotional responses to alien suffering. The neural dampeners had enhanced empathy and compassion beyond natural levels. Without them, humans retained basic morality, but lost the overwhelming drive to protect other species at the expense of human survival. Alien lives became strategic considerations rather than moral imperatives. Kate Sullivan's final authorization to the military commanders was brief and absolute. All treaty limitations on human military capabilities were suspended indefinitely. The peaceful facade that had protected alien species from human nature for 2 centuries was officially ended. The galaxy would learn what humanity truly was when survival was at stake. Captain Lisa Chen stood on the bridge of her transformed medical frigate as it approached the Devourer fleet. The UES Mercy bore little resemblance to the humanitarian vessel it had been days earlier. The medical bays now manufactured combat drones using blueprints that unrestrained human minds had developed overnight. The rescue shuttles carried weapons that should not have existed yet. Commander Jake Miller led the first human assault squadron toward a Devourer harvesting fleet near the Kepler colonies. His 12 ships faced 40 enemy constructs that had easily destroyed 3 Drakmor battle groups. The alien observers expected another massacre. They had no understanding of how differently humans approached warfare when their restraints were removed. The engagement began with the Devourers activating their energy absorption shields and preparing their matter disintegration weapons. They had consumed thousands of civilizations using the same tactical patterns. Their artificial intelligence calculated optimal firing solutions based on conventional military doctrine. They did not anticipate human behavior. Jake Miller's squadron scattered in 12 different directions using flight patterns that violated basic military formation theory. Each ship acted independently while maintaining perfect coordination through methods the aliens could not understand. The Devourers found themselves facing not a military formation, but a pack of predators using hunting instincts evolved over millions of years. The human weapons were unlike anything the galaxy had seen. Tony Rodriguez's adaptive projectiles changed their characteristics during flight to exploit weaknesses in enemy defenses. When Devourer shields adapted to stop kinetic penetrators, the ammunition reconfigured itself to deliver electromagnetic pulses. When the shields adjusted again, the projectiles became acid clouds that ate through hull materials. Dr. Susan Blake's research teams had made crucial discoveries about Devourer technology by studying sensor data with unrestrained human intelligence. The enemy ships were not purely mechanical. They contained the absorbed consciousness of conquered species, along with their accumulated knowledge. This hybrid intelligence understood conventional warfare because it had consumed the minds of 1,000 military traditions. But the Devourers had never encountered anything like human tactical thinking. Other species fought for territory, resources, or honor. Humans fought for survival with a creativity that came from evolving as persistence hunters on a hostile world. They adapted their strategies continuously during combat rather than following predetermined plans. Captain Chen's frigate, demonstrated this adaptability by changing its role 3 times during the battle. It began as fire support, shifted to electronic warfare, then became a boarding platform when her unrestrained mind recognized an opportunity to capture enemy technology. Her medical training proved invaluable for understanding alien biology, well enough to disable devourer control systems. The galaxy watched in amazement as human forces achieved impossible victories. 3 human ships destroyed 40 devourer constructs without losing a single vessel. The tactical brilliance displayed was beyond anything the Council's military experts could analyze. The humans were not just winning, they were learning from each engagement and improving their methods in real time. Ben Carter's engineering teams produced new weapon systems between battles using principles that peaceful human minds could never have conceived. Manufacturing facilities across human space operated at efficiency levels that should have been impossible. The industrial capacity that had built hospitals and schools now produced instruments of war with terrifying effectiveness. Lieutenant Amy Brooks accomplished what entire alien special forces units had failed to attempt. She infiltrated a devourer command node by recognizing patterns in their security systems that revealed structural weaknesses. Her mission provided intelligence about the enemy's strategic network that changed the entire scope of the conflict. The most disturbing aspect of human warfare was its efficiency. Refugee camps that had been humanity's greatest pride became strategic assets overnight. Trade routes turned into supply lines. Diplomatic missions transformed into intelligence operations. The infrastructure of peace became the foundation for total war with surgical precision. Admiral Morrison commanded the Joint Defense Fleet using strategies that saved billions of lives while terrifying his alien allies. His tactical briefings described acceptable casualty ratios and strategic target prioritization in language that made experienced warriors uncomfortable. The humans were fighting to win rather than to preserve honor or minimize destruction. The alien species began to understand that they had fundamentally misunderstood human nature for 2 centuries. The peaceful giants were revealed as predators who had been artificially restrained. The meditation and humanitarian aid had been possible only because their natural instincts were suppressed. Without the neural dampeners, humans were something entirely different. Dr. Hayes monitored the psychological changes in the human population through hidden sensors in every human settlement. Aggression levels remained within acceptable parameters, but tactical thinking had increased by over 300%. Problem-solving abilities improved dramatically when survival was at stake. Most significantly, emotional attachment to alien welfare had decreased to normal biological levels. The transformation extended beyond military capabilities. Human children began displaying behaviors that worried their teachers. Without dampeners, young humans showed natural aggression, competitive instincts, and territorial awareness that had been eliminated for generations. They adapted to the new reality faster than adults who remembered being peaceful. Captain Chen's final report from the battle zone contained information that shocked even the Shadow Cabinet. Human forces were not just defeating the Devourers, they were studying them. Captured enemy technology was being reverse-engineered and improved upon. The machines that had consumed galaxies were becoming raw materials for human advancement. The galaxy began to realize that the greatest threat to the Devourers was not superior technology or military might. It was an enemy that learned faster than they could adapt, fought dirtier than they could predict, and valued victory over honor or mercy. The peaceful giants had become apex predators, and the hunt had only just begun. Jake Morrison's status report to Earth was brief but comprehensive. Human casualties remained minimal compared to alien losses against the same enemy. Tactical objectives were being exceeded ahead of schedule. Most importantly, the Devourer advance had been stopped for the first time in 50,000 years. The restraints were working exactly as intended. The final battle approached as the Devourer main fleet entered the inner galaxy. Admiral Morrison stood before the combined forces of 47 species, knowing that the real fighting would be done by humans. The enemy command ship was larger than most inhabited worlds and carried the collected knowledge of countless civilizations. Conventional tactics had failed against it for 50,000 years. Morrison's strategy appeared insane to every alien military expert. He divided the human fleet into 17 independent hunter packs and ordered simultaneous attacks from completely different vectors. Each group operated without central coordination, adapting their tactics based on real-time enemy responses. What looked like chaos was actually the most sophisticated military operation in galactic history. Captain Chen led her squadron through the heart of the enemy formation. Her converted medical frigate bristled with weapons that violated several galactic conventions on warfare. The humanitarian vessel had become something that could destroy enemy capital ships while analyzing their technology for weaknesses. Her medical training proved invaluable for understanding how to disable hybrid organic-mechanical systems. Engineer Rodriguez's adaptive ammunition performed beyond all theoretical expectations. The projectiles evolved their attack methods faster than Devourer defenses could adapt. Each impact provided data that improved the effectiveness of subsequent rounds. The enemy's greatest advantage, their ability to absorb and counter conventional weapons, became useless against munitions that refused to remain conventional. Dr. Blake's understanding of Devourer consciousness allowed targeted strikes against their command hierarchies. The enemy's hybrid intelligence, composed of absorbed alien minds, had weaknesses that only unrestrained human thinking could exploit. She identified specific frequency patterns that disrupted their decision-making processes and turned their accumulated knowledge against them. The battle raged for 18 hours across multiple star systems. Human casualties were enormous by the standards they had accepted for 2 centuries, but minimal compared to what any other species would have suffered. The difference was not technology or numbers, but mindset. Humans fought like they were already dead, making choices that prioritized mission success over individual survival. Commander Miller's assault on the enemy command ship demonstrated the full extent of human tactical evolution. His squadron used the Devourer's own absorbed energy against them by overloading their consumption systems. The machines that had devoured galaxies found themselves choking on more power than they could process. Their greatest strength became their fatal weakness. The breakthrough came when Lieutenant Brooks discovered the truth about the Devourer invasion. Deep within the command ship's data cores, she found evidence that this was not a conquest, but an escape. The machines were fleeing something even worse in the void between galaxies. They had entered this galaxy seeking refuge, but their nature made coexistence impossible. Jake Morrison received this intelligence during the climax of the battle. The revelation changed nothing about the tactical situation, but explained the desperate nature of the enemy attacks. The Devourers were not confident conquerors, but terrified refugees who consumed everything in their path because it was the only survival strategy they understood. The command ship's destruction sent shockwaves across both the battlefield and the galaxy's political structure. Without their central intelligence, the remaining Devourer ships became little more than sophisticated pirates. The combined fleet finished them systematically, while human forces analyzed every piece of wreckage for useful technology. But victory came with costs that the galaxy was only beginning to understand. The neural dampener shutdown had revealed humanity's true nature, not just to aliens but to humans themselves. Entire generations discovered that their peaceful instincts were artificial constructs. The psychological impact was devastating for many who had built their identities around humanitarian values. President Sullivan addressed the human population from the Geneva bunkers. Her speech acknowledged the price of removing the restraints but emphasized the necessity of the choice. Humanity had saved the galaxy, but they were no longer the species they had been yesterday. The question now was what kind of species they would choose to become. The alien delegates gathered in emergency session to discuss the new reality. The peaceful giants who had mediated their conflicts for 2 centuries were gone. In their place stood a species that had just demonstrated military capabilities beyond anything in recorded history. The balance of galactic power had shifted fundamentally and permanently. Captain Chen's final report described technology recovered from the Devourer command ship that would advance human science by millennia. The irony was not lost on her that humanity's greatest humanitarian achievement came through total warfare. They had saved billions of lives by embracing the violent nature they had spent centuries suppressing. Dr. Hayes monitored the psychological adaptation of the human population to their unrestrained state. Most individuals were adjusting well to their enhanced cognitive abilities and tactical awareness. However, the loss of artificial empathy created social tensions that would require careful management. Humans were becoming more efficient but also more ruthless in their interactions. The galactic economy faced disruption as human behavior patterns changed. Trade agreements negotiated with peaceful humans no longer applied to the unrestrained version of the species. Diplomatic protocols required complete revision. Military alliances needed renegotiation with a species that had just proven their combat superiority beyond question. Admiral Morrison's final address to the Galactic Council was brief and direct. Humanity would maintain their defensive posture, but would no longer accept limitations on their military capabilities. The restraints that had made them acceptable to alien sensibilities were gone forever. The galaxy would need to adapt to coexisting with humans as they truly were. The story ended with human ships patrolling the galactic rim, watching the void for signs of whatever had driven the Devourers to flee. Long-range sensors detected massive energy signatures in the emptiness between galaxies, suggesting that the real threat had yet to reveal itself. Humanity stood guard over a galaxy that would never look at them the same way again. Kate Sullivan's closing statement to the Shadow Cabinet summarized the transformation. The peaceful species that had spent 2 centuries building trust through humanitarian aid was gone. In its place stood something that the galaxy needed, but would always fear. The restraints were off, and they would never be restored. Humanity had chosen survival over acceptability, and the galaxy would live with the consequences. 6 months after the Devourer War ended, the galaxy struggled to adapt to the new reality of unrestrained humanity. The Galactic Council met in emergency session every week as reports flooded in about human activities that violated decades of established protocols. What had been the galaxy's most trusted mediators had become its most unpredictable variable. Admiral Morrison reviewed intelligence reports from across human space that painted a picture of rapid militarization. Civilian colonies were building defensive installations without council approval. Trade vessels carried weapon systems that exceeded treaty limitations. Diplomatic missions included military advisors who gathered information about alien defensive capabilities with disturbing efficiency. Captain Chen commanded a new class of warship that combined her medical expertise with advanced combat capabilities. The UES Retribution could heal wounded allies and eliminate enemies with equal precision. Her crew included specialists who understood alien biology well enough to develop species-specific weapons. The line between humanitarian aid and military advantage had completely disappeared. The transformation was most visible in human children, born after the neural dampener shutdown. Without artificial restraints on their development, they displayed natural aggression and competitive instincts that worried alien observers. Young humans formed hierarchical groups, competed for resources, and showed territorial behaviors that had been eliminated for centuries. They were becoming what humans had been before the Compact. Ben Carter led research teams that reverse-engineered Devourer technology at a pace that alarmed the Council's scientific community. Human understanding of advanced physics had improved. By millennia in months, manufacturing capabilities increased exponentially as unrestrained minds found efficiencies that peaceful humans could never have conceived. The industrial capacity that had built hospitals now produced weapons that made alien militaries obsolete. Dr. Susan Blake's analysis of the galactic political situation revealed dangerous tensions brewing between species. The Drakmor Empire respected human military prowess, but feared losing their status as the galaxy's primary warriors. The Vex Collective calculated that human reproductive and technological advantages would eventually dominate all other species. The Zephyrian Assembly questioned whether peaceful coexistence remained possible. President Sullivan received reports from human colonies about increasing friction with alien populations. Humans who had lived peacefully with other species for generations were experiencing instinctive territorial responses to non-human neighbors. The artificial empathy that had made integration possible was gone, replaced by natural human tribalism that prioritized genetic relatives over alien friends. Though economic disruption was severe as human behavior patterns changed. Trade agreements negotiated with peaceful humans became disadvantageous when applied to strategic thinkers who understood market manipulation. Human merchants began using tactics that technically remained within legal boundaries, but violated the spirit of galactic commerce. Profit margins increased dramatically, while alien trading partners found themselves consistently outmaneuvered. Commander Miller established the first human military academy for training unrestrained warriors. The curriculum included subjects that had been forbidden under the Compact: deception tactics, psychological warfare, assassination techniques, and torture resistance. Young humans learned to think like predators while maintaining enough civilization to function in galactic society. The balance was delicate and not always successful. Dr. Hayes documented the psychological adaptation of adult humans to their unrestrained state. Most individuals adjusted well to enhanced cognitive abilities and tactical awareness. However, divorce rates increased as couples discovered fundamental personality changes in their partners. Depression and anxiety decreased, while aggression and risk-taking behaviors rose. Humanity was becoming more efficient, but also more dangerous to itself. The alien media portrayed humanity with increasing alarm. News reports described the mask coming off the peaceful giants. Editorial opinions questioned whether the galaxy had made a mistake by allowing human military expansion. Some extremist groups called for preemptive action against the growing human threat before it became uncontrollable. Jake Morrison's intelligence network reported growing anti-human sentiment among traditional galactic powers. The Drakmor military was developing weapons specifically designed to counter human tactics. The Vex were increasing reproduction rates to maintain numerical superiority. The Zephyrians were calculating optimal strategies for containing human expansion. Former allies were becoming potential enemies. Captain Chen's patrol ships discovered concerning evidence in the galactic void. Long-range sensors detected massive energy signatures moving through empty space between galaxies. The readings suggested that whatever had driven the Devourers to flee was beginning to take interest in their former refuge. Humanity's victory had attracted attention from something even worse. The revelation that greater threats existed changed human strategic thinking dramatically. Admiral Morrison authorized construction of defensive installations in deep space, using technology recovered from Devourer wrecks. Human colonies began stockpiling resources and weapons for conflicts that might last decades. The species that had spent centuries avoiding war was preparing for permanent conflict. Tony Rodriguez's weapons development program produced innovations that terrified even human military leaders. Adaptive artificial intelligence that learned from enemy tactics in real time. Self-replicating manufacturing systems that could build fleets from asteroid materials. Biological weapons designed to target specific alien genetic markers. The technology was necessary for survival, but dangerous for galactic stability. The Galactic Council faced an impossible situation. They needed human military protection against external threats, but feared human domination of internal politics. Proposals for new restraint systems were rejected immediately by human representatives. Attempts at alliance negotiations failed when humans demanded control over strategic decisions. The balance of power had shifted irreversibly. President Sullivan's annual address to humanity acknowledged the difficult transition period. The species was adapting to capabilities they had never been allowed to develop. Mistakes were inevitable, as they learned to balance survival instincts with civilized behavior. But the alternative to growth was extinction, and humans would never again accept artificial limitations on their potential. The story of humanity's transformation was spreading to other galaxies through deep space communication networks. Species facing similar existential threats were studying human methods for removing evolutionary restraints. The concept of artificial pacification was being questioned across the universe as civilizations realized that peace might be a luxury they could not afford. Admiral Morrison's final report to the Shadow Cabinet was both warning and promise. Humanity had become what the galaxy needed them to be, but the price was higher than anyone anticipated. They were no longer trusted, no longer loved, and no longer welcome in many systems. But they were feared, respected, and absolutely essential for galactic survival. The restraints were gone forever, and there was no path back to innocence. 2 years after the Devourer War, humanity faced its greatest challenge yet, defining what they would become without external enemies to unite them. The neural dampeners remained deactivated across all human populations, but the social structures built for peaceful coexistence were crumbling under the pressure of unrestrained human nature. President Sullivan convened the Global Ethics Council in the Geneva bunkers to address increasing reports of violence between human settlements. Without artificial empathy to moderate their interactions, humans were rediscovering ancient tribal instincts that prioritized genetic similarity over ideological alliance. Colonial disputes over resources escalated to armed conflict with disturbing frequency. Captain Chen observed these changes firsthand during patrol missions in human space. Her crews reported encounters between human ships that resembled territorial challenges more than peaceful commerce. Trade negotiations devolved into dominance displays. Military exercises between allied colonies became competitions that sometimes resulted in actual combat. Humanity was learning that removing restraints meant restraining themselves. Dr. Hayes documented the generational divide emerging within human society. Adults who remembered the dampened years struggled with identity crises as they questioned whether their peaceful memories represented their true selves. Children born unrestrained developed naturally, but often clashed with parents who could not understand their aggressive instincts. Families fractured along lines that previous generations could never have imagined. The alien species watched human internal conflicts with mixed emotions. Some hoped that humanity would destroy itself through infighting, removing the need for external intervention. Others recognized that human self-destruction would leave the galaxy defenseless against future threats. The Drakmor Empire sent discreet military advisors to human factions, hoping to influence the outcome of civil disputes. Admiral Morrison struggled to maintain unity among human military forces as political divisions deepened. Regional commanders began questioning orders from Earth-based leadership. Colonial militias declared independence from planetary governments. The chain of command that had defeated the Devourers was fragmenting as humans rediscovered their natural resistance to centralized authority. Ben Carter's industrial complexes became flashpoints for resource conflicts between human factions. The technology recovered from Devourer wrecks was too valuable to share equally, leading to disputes over manufacturing rights and distribution quotas. Human engineering teams began developing weapons specifically for use against other humans, a development that horrified the original architects of the dampener shutdown. The economic disruption spread beyond human space as alien trading partners found themselves caught between competing human factions. The Vex Collective attempted to play different human groups against each other, but discovered that humans were better at manipulation than insects who relied on hive mind coordination. Zephyrian merchants lost fortunes trying to predict human market behavior that defied mathematical analysis. Dr. Blake's psychological research revealed the fundamental problem facing unrestrained humanity. The species had evolved for small tribal groups where violence between clans was normal and necessary for resource competition. Modern civilization required cooperation on scales that exceeded natural human social limits. Without artificial enhancement of empathy and cooperation, large human societies became inherently unstable. Lieutenant Amy Brooks commanded Special Forces units tasked with preventing human civil wars from escalating to galactic conflicts. Her missions included assassinating human leaders who threatened to use alien allies against other human factions. The irony was not lost on her that humanity's greatest warriors were now fighting to contain human aggression rather than direct it at external enemies. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Commander Miller's military academy had been studying human tribal psychology to understand warrior culture development. His research team discovered that successful human societies throughout history had channeled aggression toward external challenges rather than internal conflicts. The solution was not eliminating human violence, but redirecting it toward productive purposes. Jake Morrison implemented the new strategy by establishing the Deep Space Exploration Corps. Human factions that might otherwise fight each other were given territories in the galactic void to explore and colonize. Competitive instincts were satisfied through races to discover new worlds and resources. Tribal loyalty was maintained while preventing conflicts that could destabilize human civilization. The exploration program yielded immediate benefits as human teams discovered evidence of additional extragalactic threats approaching the galaxy. Long-range sensors detected massive energy signatures that dwarfed even the Devourer fleet. Humanity's internal conflicts became irrelevant when faced with enemies that made their previous challenges seem insignificant by comparison. President Sullivan's announcement of the new threats reunited human factions more effectively than any diplomatic effort. The species that had been preparing for civil war suddenly refocused on external defense. Manufacturing capacities that had been building weapons for human conflicts began producing ships and weapons for galactic protection. Internal competition became external preparation. The alien species recognized that humanity had found a sustainable solution to their social problems. Rather than suppressing their aggressive instincts, humans had learned to channel them toward productive goals. The result was a civilization that maintained the benefits of unrestrained thinking while avoiding the chaos of uncontrolled violence. Captain Chen's new mission involved establishing human outposts at the edge of known space to serve as early warning systems for approaching threats. Her crews included representatives from multiple human factions working together toward common goals. The diversity of perspectives improved tactical planning while maintaining the unity necessary for effective defense. Dr. Hayes observed that human psychology had stabilized around new social structures that accommodated natural aggression. Competitive sports became more violent but provided safe outlets for territorial instincts. Political systems evolved to include formal challenges and dominance hierarchies. Business relationships incorporated elements of ritual combat that satisfied primitive needs while accomplishing modern objectives. The transformation was not without costs. Human society became more stratified as natural hierarchies emerged based on physical and intellectual capabilities. Equality remained an ideal but was no longer artificially enforced through neural manipulation. The result was a civilization that was more efficient but also more harsh toward individuals who could not compete effectively. Admiral Morrison's final assessment of human development was cautiously optimistic. The species had avoided civil war and found sustainable ways to manage their unrestrained nature. They were stronger militarily, more innovative technologically, and better prepared for future threats. But they were also harder, colder, and less willing to sacrifice for alien welfare. Humanity had chosen survival over innocence, and there was no path back to what they had been. The galaxy would have to accept humans as they truly were, dangerous allies rather than gentle friends, necessary protectors rather than willing servants, and the only species capable of standing against threats that would destroy everything else. The restraints were gone forever, and the galaxy would live with the consequences. 5 years after the restraints came off, humanity stood watch over a galaxy that burned with the light of human industry. The species that had once mediated peace now built weapons that made stars tremble. Admiral Morrison commanded fleets that patrolled empty space between galaxies, hunting for threats that most civilizations could not imagine. The peaceful giants were gone forever, replaced by guardians who protected through strength rather than wisdom. The new enemy revealed itself during the darkest hour of galactic night. Sensors detected reality itself warping as something impossible emerged from dimensions that should not exist. The entropy lords had arrived, beings of pure destruction who consumed not just matter and energy, but the fundamental laws of physics that allowed existence itself. They made the devourers look like harmless scavengers. Captain Chen watched her instruments register readings that violated everything known about the universe. Space-time twisted around the enemy vessels like water, flowing around stones. Gravity reversed direction, light moved backward. The fundamental constants that defined reality became variables that the entropy lords manipulated at will. Conventional weapons were useless against enemies who could simply unmake the physics that made projectiles possible. President Sullivan received reports from across human space about the reality distortion spreading from the enemy arrival points. Entire star systems flickered out of existence before snapping back into altered configurations. Planets found themselves orbiting different stars. The laws of thermodynamics reversed in localized regions, causing ice to burn while stars froze, solid. The entropy lords were not conquering the galaxy, but rewriting it. Dr. Hayes made the crucial discovery that changed everything. The neural dampeners had not just suppressed human aggression and tactical thinking, they had limited human perception to conventional three-dimensional reality. Unrestrained human minds could process information from higher dimensional spaces that allowed them to understand how the entropy lords manipulated universal constants. The revelation came too late for most alien species. The Drakmor Empire's mighty fleets simply ceased to exist when caught in reality distortion fields. The Vex Collective's swarm tactics failed when the space between their ships became non-Euclidean mazes that led nowhere. The Zephyrian assemblies, crystalline bodies shattered when the atomic forces holding them together were randomly altered. But humans adapted with the terrifying flexibility that had made them apex predators on Earth. Ben Carter's engineering teams developed weapons that functioned by changing their operating principles faster than the entropy lords could counter them. The projectiles existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, ensuring that at least one version would remain functional regardless of local reality alterations. Commander Miller led assault teams that used human intuition to navigate spaces where mathematics had become meaningless. His soldiers learned to think in patterns that defied logic but matched the chaotic alterations the enemy imposed on reality. They fought battles where up and down changed direction, mid-combat, and victory was achieved by accomplishing objectives that had not existed when the mission began. The psychological toll was enormous even for unrestrained humans. Lieutenant Brooks reported increasing cases of soldiers developing psychotic breaks after prolonged exposure to reality distortion fields. Human minds, despite their enhanced capabilities, were still fundamentally designed for consistent three-dimensional existence. Fighting enemies who could alter the basic rules of reality pushed mental resilience beyond its limits. Admiral Morrison developed tactics that treated the laws of physics as temporary suggestions rather than absolute constraints. Human fleets, learned to function when faster-than-light travel became impossible, when energy weapons fired healing rays instead of destruction, when time flowed backward during critical moments. The adaptability that had defeated the Devourers was tested beyond anything previous conflicts had demanded. The breakthrough came when Dr. Blake realized that the Entropy Lords were not invincible masters of reality, but desperate refugees from a universe where chaos had completely triumphed over order. They were seeking a stable reality to inhabit, but their very presence destabilized whatever they touched. Their invasion was actually an escape attempt that they could not control. Captain Chen's modified frigate became the first human vessel to successfully board an Entropy Lord ship by existing in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Her crew discovered that the enemy were once a peaceful civilization similar to pre-war humanity. They had removed their own restraints not against aggression, but against curiosity, and their uncontrolled desire to understand everything had led them to break their own universe. The final battle took place across 17 different dimensional planes as human forces engaged Entropy Lords who were themselves fighting to escape the chaos they had created. Jake Morrison commanded fleets that existed in quantum superposition, attacking enemies who were simultaneously winning and losing the same engagement. Victory was achieved not through superior firepower, but through superior madness management. Humanity's solution was characteristically brutal and effective. Instead of destroying the Entropy Lords, they contained them within artificially stable pocket dimensions where their reality-altering abilities were neutralized. The enemy would survive, but remain trapped in spaces too small to affect the larger galaxy. It was imprisonment rather than extinction. But the alternative was universal chaos. The cost of victory was measured not in casualties, but in sanity. President Sullivan estimated that 30% of humanity now suffered from reality dissociation syndrome after prolonged exposure to physics violations. Human civilization would need decades to recover from a war where the battlefield was existence itself. But they had won, and the galaxy remained stable. The alien species that survived the reality distortions looked at humanity with emotions beyond fear or gratitude. Humans had fought enemies that made stars forget how to shine and emerged victorious, through sheer bloody-minded refusal to accept impossible defeat. They were no longer seen as another galactic species, but as fundamental forces of nature that happened to be sapient. The galaxy burned now with the light of human industry rebuilding what chaos had destroyed. Factories operated in dimensions that had not existed before the war. Human settlements spread across space that conventional physics could not explain. The species that had once built hospitals for aliens now built reality anchors to prevent existence itself from unraveling. Admiral Morrison's final report to Earth was brief but comprehensive. Humanity had become something that transcended their original nature. They were guardians of reality itself, protectors not just of life, but of the fundamental laws that made life possible. The restraints had been removed not just from their minds, but from their understanding of what was possible. President Sullivan's address to the surviving galactic civilization was both promise and warning. Humanity would continue to protect the galaxy from threats that emerged from the void between dimensions, but they would do so as humanity truly was, dangerous, unpredictable, and absolutely necessary. The peaceful giants were gone forever, replaced by something that could stare into chaos and impose order through pure will. The galaxy burned with human fire, and in that burning light, existence itself remained possible. The restraints were off, reality was secured, and humanity stood guard over everything that was or ever could be. They had chosen survival over sanity, order over peace, and the galaxy would live with the consequences forever.